In the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night, in the heart of the night, this world will burn bright. We will set it alight. In the heart of the night.
Hello everyone, I'm Anthropomantic Fiend, and I do horror-related things on the internet. Last week I uploaded my 300 subscriber contest video, and the response to that is already overwhelming. I've given people basically a month to enter, and already I have tons of entries from a lot of really great people, so thank you and best of luck to everyone. Today, as you know, I am talking about Lady Frankenstein. This is a movie that came out in 1971. I think it was dubbed out of Italian, but I am not certain. I will put more info on that down here. Essentially, the plot of this movie is that Baron Frankenstein has been conducting his experiments. Meanwhile, his daughter has gone off to college and has basically graduated medical school and has learned all the skills she needs to become a really good surgeon. But what she really wants to do is to assist her father in his work, and to even push it further as far as the creation of life goes. Baron Frankenstein ends up bringing to life a monster, which in this version kills him right out of the gate. The monster then escapes and starts killing random villagers left and right and causing uproar, panic, and a growing hatred from the villagers. Lady Frankenstein's solution to this is to create a new monster in order to defeat the old one, so she has to go about that in her own twisted fashion. The biggest draw for this movie for me is absolutely the aesthetic. It is 100% my thing. You've got gorgeous period gothic sets and costumes and some solid cinematography as well. It feels almost like a Hammer film. You've got a big gothic castle with bats and candelabras, shadowy corners, a laboratory with all kinds of bubbling apparatus, your classic village. It feels almost like a cross between the Universal world and the Hammer world with a 70s exploitation feel, which is really cool. If there is a restored version of this out there, I'd love to see it. I did actually think I saw that there is a Blu-ray of this movie out there, so if there is a nicer quality version of this movie out there, I would love to see it just for the aesthetic. And the creation scene especially feels like a cross between what we see in the Universal movies and the Hammer movies. You've got all of the electrical apparatus and the bubbling beakers and everything that feel very, very Universal, like a slightly cut-rate version of the Kenneth Strickfaden stuff you see in Frankenstein and Bride of Frankenstein. But also, you've got, you know, brains and hearts and jars and the color look and all of that stuff that feels a lot more Hammer, and it really combines those two into its own sort of B-movie version of both. It's not as spectacular as what we get in Universal. I never thought the creation scenes in the Hammer stuff were terribly spectacular anyway, but it's definitely not as spectacular as the Hammer or the Universal stuff, but it still feels like it pays tribute to both in a way that I really liked. And the music is sort of your classic stock spookiness. It's good, but it's nothing really special. There was some cool pipe organ stuff mixed in there, as well as I thought some almost sort of weird electronic elements. I'm not totally sure what that was, but it added an interesting feel to the score that I kind of liked, but it's nothing that's gonna stick in my head as memorable. It's not an outstanding horror soundtrack or anything. As far as characters go, we've got the Baron Frankenstein and his daughter, Lady Frankenstein, and it very much is a like father, like daughter situation. Both are very similarly haughty and uncaring for the rest of the world or for the villagers or what their lives are like, and it feels a lot like the cold, unfeeling version of the Doctor that we get from Peter Cushing in the Hammer movies. It never really goes to that length, but with Lady Frankenstein you do get this sense that she's almost even more twisted than her father was, and isn't just a sociopath. She actually has sort of these evil, twisted leanings, but she's not a straight-up evil character. She does have her good points, but she doesn't care about the villagers at all. She mostly cares about her father and will do anything to help him, or even more so, his reputation. If that means screwing over a ton of villagers in order to do it, so be it. Baron Frankenstein, again, he's sort of the cold, clinical Peter Cushing type, but he has this weird moment that feels like it was just for plot reasons when they're debating whether or not to transplant the brain because it's apparently damaged, and it's also a criminal brain, and we've got all of that in there. And he goes, and I think this is verbatim, I tried to get it down as best as I could, but he says, "Instinct, not thought, changes the world, and my instinct tells me to transplant that brain right now," which is not what I'd expect Baron Frankenstein to say. He doesn't seem like the kind to act on feeling or instinct. He feels like he's just a very much brains over emotion type person. But Victor in the book is sort of kind of secretly a romantic, and he has all these romantic views that sort of undercut the thought aspect of his science. So I don't even know. I'm sure the filmmakers didn't read any too deep into this at all. They were just kind of like, well, we need a reason to transplant the criminal brain into the monster, so we're gonna have him say this. And it keeps the story moving forward, but I just thought that was kind of an interesting thing for Frankenstein to say. It seems like it's out of character, but I don't know. It just struck me as odd. And we have some villager characters who are they keep this story moving forward. We've got one who we keep coming back to who is seen as something of a criminal by the local law enforcement, and he's kind of downtrodden by them, but he's not a very likable character either. He's a little bit of a pervert. He keeps trying to hit on Lady Frankenstein and is a bit of a creeper towards her during a lot of this movie. This movie is way more perverted than it needs to be in some places, but I'll get into that. The villager characters were kind of interesting and entertaining, but they were kind of generic. There was nothing really interesting about their characters. They were just kind of there and either presented some kind of entertainment or were killed off, except for that one guy who does have some plot significance because he is selling bodies to the Baron Frankenstein. I like how the story sort of addresses the sexism towards Lady Frankenstein, but at the same time the sort of haughty elitism of the Frankenstein family towards the villagers. On the one hand, there's all of these people telling Lady Frankenstein, you know, you're a woman, so you can't be a scientist or do this thing or this thing or this thing. But at the same time, she's one of the elite and she sort of looks down on other people. It just creates this interesting character dynamic. Again, this is a total exploitation film, so I don't think the filmmakers were really reading too much into that, and they don't play a lot with that, but it is an element that creates some interesting dynamics between the characters, which I liked. There's this criminal named Morgan who everybody in the village hates, and Baron Frankenstein uses his brain and his heart. It's interesting in this version because it's not just the brain or the heart like it was in the Universal and Hammer versions respectively. You need both to be transplanted in this version. But Morgan's brain and heart are transplanted into the monster, and it is the criminal brain trope that we get from the Universal movies, which I've never really liked, especially in the Universal films, where the monster is such a sensitive, kind character, at least in the first two movies, a little bit in the third one, and the fourth one, actually, but it lessens after the first two. But anyway, the criminal brain thing kind of works for this version, but it's just a trope I've never liked because it never fit with the Universal ones. And the monster in this one is a totally soulless, killing shell of a character. He is the exact opposite of Shelley's sensitive creature. He actually, at one point, does the opposite of something that both Shelley's creature and the monster in Bride of Frankenstein does, which is rather than rescuing a girl who is drowning in this river, he just kind of finds this couple who are having sex by a river, which is why. He then proceeds to kill the guy and then randomly throw the girl into the river where she's found later. So total opposite of what Shelley's monster did. So they kind of play him as very much the soulless killing machine, but at the same time, there's another moment where he's going on another rampage, and we get that moment that we get in a lot of Frankenstein movies where he sees a child and is just like, oh, you're nice, so he doesn't kill the child, but he kills everybody else, and it's weird. There's also sort of this implication that the monster is only killing the villagers who helped to create him because he resents the fact that he's alive, and so he's killing off the villagers who supplied bodies, and he's killing the doctor, but it's kind of ambiguous and weird. The monster character is weird in this, but again, this isn't a movie that is too terribly concerned with plot. It's really more about, for the filmmakers, the exploitation aspect, and for me, just the aesthetic. When they create the monster, it's interesting because Baron Frankenstein does not get the classic "it's alive" line in this version. It is Charles, the assistant, who goes to Lady Frankenstein, who is sleeping, and wakes her up and sort of says, he's done it, it's alive, and it has this feeling of that classic line, but it's given to the assistant character in a very different setting, which I thought was interesting. Again, this is a total exploitation movie, so there's lots of random nudity in the film, and there are villagers in scenes who are not wearing clothes for no reason other than to make more money, because I'm assuming more people came to the movie if there were naked people in it. And for me, it's just kind of like, oh, that person's not wearing any clothes. Okay. It's always kind of unnecessary in these movies for me. I guess it's what they needed to put in the movie to make money, and it doesn't really get in the way of the story, so whatever. They do actually use the sexuality aspect at one point as a plot point, which I thought was interesting, because Lady Frankenstein wants to create a monster to fight the other monster, and in order to do that, she convinces Charles the assistant to put his brain into the body of this sort of servant stable boy character who is implied to have some mental problems, which it's an exploitation movie, so they don't really handle that in a particularly sensitive light, but I wasn't really expecting it to, and it doesn't last too long, so anyway, she sort of seduces him and is like, you've always wanted to be with me, haven't you? But I hate your body, but I love his body, but I hate his brain, so let's put your brain in his body and all of it will work. And I guess that works because that's what ends up happening, but otherwise the sexual aspects of this movie are just kind of random. They don't hamper the story, but they're very random. The idea of creating a second creature to kill the first is an original one, because in the original novel, in so many adaptations, in Bride of Frankenstein, when a second creature is created, it's always to be a mate for the first, to appease it. And in this version, the operation is repeated. It's a different operation, but a second operation is done in order to fight the first creature, which I thought was a new and interesting idea. It's probably been done in another movie, but I honestly haven't seen it that much, which surprises me. The monster just kind of goes around the village ransacking and killing people, and the kills aren't all that special. There's one mildly entertaining one with a couple of grave robbers, but this isn't a particularly gory movie, which it didn't need to be, but there are a lot of kills that are kind of repetitive and a little bit bland, and they don't add a lot to the movie. We didn't need to see as many of the kills as we did. I think some of them were necessary to show that the monster was terrorizing the village, but we didn't need as many as we did because they aren't really all that interesting, either from a story point of view or from an exploitation point of view. Look at that was brutal or super creepy or whatever, because it isn't that. It's just kind of there. Effects wise, the blood in this movie is very minimal. There is some during some of the operation scenes and a few of the more violent scenes, and it isn't realistic looking blood, but wasn't really expecting that from this kind of movie. It kind of fits the Hammer horror feel. I'm not sure if it was stock footage or what it was, but they had some close-ups of the heart in a jar beating, and it actually looked really good. I was kind of impressed with the look of that. I'm not sure how they did it or what it was, but I thought it looked good. All of the bubbling lab apparatus that was everywhere looked fantastic. There were a lot of bats flying around the castle, which were not realistic looking bats, but I didn't need them to be. You couldn't see the wires or whatever they were using to do it though, which was a plus. Might have been the crappy film quality, but I don't know. But the bats looked good and they added to the ambiance of the castle and I liked them. The monster makeup, it works for what it is, but it's very hokey. There's an eye that's way up here that doesn't need to be way up there, and it's very obviously a very cheap, fake-looking monster makeup, but it's fun for what it is, and I like sort of the almost space alien look of it with the really big head with all of the stitches going every which way. It's a fun monster makeup, and I liked it. I don't have any spoilers for this movie. There's not really much of anything to spoil. There are some entertaining kills and a kind of wild, weird ending, but if you like Hammer horror movies, if you like the classic Universal monster movies and are willing to put up with something that has a lot of those tropes and is kind of fun, but is nowhere as well made as any of those films, I do recommend checking out this movie. It is a somewhat sleazy 70s exploitation tribute to the classic gothic tropes of Universal and Hammer, and I loved it just for the aesthetic. The story was rather interesting and unique for what it was, and I thought it was a fun movie. So if that sounds up your alley, I definitely recommend checking out this movie. That is my review. Thank you for watching my video, and hopefully I will see you in another one. Bye!